It's time now for our Entre Nous segment, and today we are talking about time. Solange Moujon joins me in the studio for more. Hi, Solange.
Hi,
so you're going to break down some of the intricacies of France's relationship to le temps, or time in French, and you're starting with an hour that really is a code word here in France, le 20h. What's that?
Well, as anyone in France will tell you, the 20-hour, or le 20h, is the commonly used name for the nightly news, and people actually do call it this, not the 8 p.m. news. French speakers use military time or the 24-hour clock when they speak, and it actually took me quite a long time to get used to this.
Me too.
It was difficult. Now, as for the 20h, the news program, it is still widely followed in France, or by some 47% of TV viewers. That accounts for up to 10 million people watching it every night between one of the two main channels, TF1, and France 2. Now, some people even call it la grande messe, a high mass, because it remains in some families a nightly and nationwide ritual. But the first 20h was actually at 21h, or at 9 p.m. France's first TV program news aired 75 years ago on June 29th, 1949, and at the time, less than 1% of the population had a TV, so people gathered in meeting halls, in town halls to watch. And at that first news program, it was actually a technical feat, but it ended quite badly when it comes to live television, as journalists explained on the 50th anniversary.
I wanted to tell you that the newsreel you see were silent, like all TV stories at the time. So journalists in the studio would provide live commentary, and a sound mixer would choose a record to create the ambience. To boost audiences, on June 29th, the producer wanted to show Paris from the sky, but a strong wind blew the hot air balloon into an electric wire, which caused a fire. And that, it seems, became the first minor news story.
Now, that first news show, it lasted 15 minutes. Today, TF1, their news show lasts between 40 and 50 minutes. And France 2's broadcast was actually in the news lately because, last month, because it has launched a longer program. It is now an hour-long show. This is an attempt by France 2 to boost its ratings and to move the dial in regard to what the nightly news can be, namely with more in-depth stories, and now that shorter segments are all over our phones. Finally, we can't talk about the 20h without touching on politics. 8 p.m. sharp is the moment during elections where the new president's face is unveiled, like in 1981, when both candidates had bald heads, making the suspense even greater as the image ticked down, showing François Mitterrand's face. Now, this tradition stands true today. Most people tune in to the 20h on presidential election nights, unless, of course, you're watching cable or France 24.
So, Solange, compared to other countries, like, for example, the United States, where the traditional news program might be earlier, say at 6:30 or 7, here the primetime news is a bit later, the 20h, 8 p.m. Why?
Well, part of this is cultural. Many shops and offices close later here at around 7:30 rather than 5:30 or 5 like in the U.S. There's also a positive view of staying late in the office, or présentéisme, or being a worker in your seat. But this breakdown of time in the day also has a lot to do with France's time zone. I should actually say time zones, because France has 12 different time zones, 13 if you count France's claim in Antarctica. This is due, of course, to France's former colonies, or overseas departments and territories. The English expression, the sun never sets on the British Empire, can still, for better or worse, hold true to France. It currently has the most time zones of any nation in the world. But back to mainland France, which, unlike most of the colonies, does use daylight savings times. And the clocks are actually going to go back here on October 27th, so quite soon, so get ready for that. This still happens despite the fact that 83% of French people would rather stick to one time all year round. The daylight savings time rhythm was actually reintroduced in France in 1976 to save energy. But today, studies show that such savings, well, they're actually very, very minor.
One needs to understand that energy efficiency is getting better overall. We no longer use as many incandescent light bulbs, but LED ones. That saves a huge amount of energy, and in regard to heating, compared to the 1970s, insulation has also improved. So this means that we're saving less energy than we did 50 years ago.
Now, a 2018 push on the European level to scrap daylight savings entirely has actually been stalled. A standardization could actually create a slew of geopolitical issues between countries. But in regard to France's time, its time zone is GMT +1, even though when you actually look at a map, geographically, its longitude shows that it should actually be on the same time zone as the UK.
Interesting. All right, Solange, just to wrap up, you've chosen a few French expressions linked to time and numbers that French speakers use quite often here. Tell us.
Yeah, and I even actually learned a few myself. Let's start out with the numerical ones. The first ones show how much the French day is broken into mealtime moments. You have le 4 heures. This is shorthand for snack time, or le goûter. And then you have entre midi et deux. This refers to workers' daily lunch break. It's often used in regard to shop hours, such as are you closed between 12 and 2 or entre midi and 2 heures. Then you have 5 à 7. This is an expression to describe when lovers meet up or the hours between the workday and home life for those having affairs. Then, of course, as we explained earlier, there's the 20 heures, the famous 20 heures, the nightly news hour, which also for a short time became a moment when French people clapped at their balconies and hit metal pans to thank first responders during COVID.
For the health workers. There are people who are spending all their time saving others' lives. I think we owe them this.
Now, there are a whole slew of other expressions, and I can't get to most of them, but I wanted to highlight a few stellar ones. There is the quart d'heure de politesse, or the 15-minute grace period. This can be used either as an excuse when you're a tiny bit late, or it can actually be used on purpose as showing up at friends' houses a few minutes late so as to give them more time to prepare.
You can always do that at my house.
I won't come early. You have the quart d'heure américain, or the American quarter hour, which means ladies' choice, like it dances. Then there's passer un sale quart d'heure, or having a rough time. And then chercher midi à 14 heures, complicating things by looking for noon at 2 p.m. And finally, the one that I did not know at all is midi pétante, or noon sharp. Now, why pétante? Well, the word means fart or a burst. And I wanted to leave you with this final story because it is quite sweet. Back when people's watches were not reliable, Parisians would use sundials to set their watches. A popular place to do this was the Palais Royal in central Paris. And the story goes that the refurbishments of the building did away with a sundial that was popular there. So a clockmaker set up a little cannon in 1789, and the sun's rays would make it burst gunpowder at noon. Oh. Sadly, the statuette was stolen, but it has now been replaced by a replica. During the French Heritage Day, or Les Journées de Patrimoine, it does blast off, now electronically, at noon. But what I love about it is that the expression that was engraved on the original canon. In Latin, it was written horis non numere nisi serena, which means I only count the happy hours.
Oh, I love that. Solange, thank you so much for telling us all about time, or le temps, here in France. So that's France 24's Solange Mougin.